Welcome back to the show. Today, we're turning our attention to a figure who I think embodies the concept of duality, perhaps more than anyone we've covered recently.
It's a fascinating and a very complex story.
We are going to be analyzing the life of Jock Zonfrillo. And it's a story that reads less like a standard biography and, well, more like a film script. It's got the rise to fame, a really crushing fall, and a legacy that's still being debated today.
It's a narrative of immense contrast, really. On one hand, you have the celebrated chef, this charismatic judge on MasterChef Australia, and a man who championed Indigenous ingredients with a passion that I think undeniably changed the Australian culinary landscape.
Right. He was the man in the three-piece suit and the kilt, the mentor to all those aspiring home cooks on television.
Exactly. But then on the other hand,
There's this whole other narrative, the shadow narrative. We're talking about a history that involves severe addiction, bankruptcy, legal battles, and some pretty significant controversy around the truthfulness of his own life story.
it is incredibly rare to find someone who was so publicly adored, yet privately besieged by that level of chaos.
Absolutely. Born Barry Zonfrillo, he really crafted this public persona that was equal parts, rough around the edges survivor and refined gastronomic leader.
And that's what we want to examine today. The entire trajectory of his life, from his childhood in Glasgow to the dizzying heights of culinary fame, and then ultimately to his untimely death in 2023.
We have a massive amount of ground to cover. We're going to look at his rise to becoming a head chef at a remarkably young age, his very specific culinary philosophy around native ingredients,
The total financial collapse of his business empire, which is a story in itself.
and the hidden health battles he was fighting at the very end. But okay, let's start at the beginning. Before all the fame and the controversy, where did the story actually begin?
It begins in Scotland. Jock, or Barry as he was born, came into the world on August 4, 1976, in Glasgow.
In Glasgow, though he was mostly raised in Ayr, I believe.
That's right, raised in Ayr. His background was working class, but with this really distinct cultural mix that you have to think influenced his palate even from an early age.
Right, his family background is a really interesting blend. His father, Ivan, was a barber from Scoury, Italy, and his mother, Sarah, was a hairdresser from a Scottish family.
So he had that Italian-Scottish influence right from the start.
You can just see how that combination, the Italian reverence for fresh produce and family, mixed with a hearty, no-nonsense Scottish upbringing, might produce a chef.
Well, exactly. And like so many chefs who reach the absolute top of their field, that spark for the kitchen was ignited very, very early. He didn't wait until he was an adult to start working.
No, he began as a part-time dishwasher at age 12.
12. And this wasn't just some casual weekend job for pocket money. This was a full immersion into a very adult, very high-pressure world.
12 years old is incredibly young. Most kids are just worrying about homework or video games, and he was already in a commercial kitchen environment.
He was working at the same restaurant where his older sister, Carla, was a waitress. And you have to remember the environment of kitchens in the late 80s and early 90s. They were not the sanitized HR-compliant spaces we see on TV today.
Not at all. They were
Yeah.
rough, they were loud, they were incredibly intense.
And this is where the story takes its first really dramatic turn, which in a way sets the pace for the rest of his life. Just 3 weeks after he started washing dishes, one of the chefs had a motorbike accident,
And suddenly there's a gap on the line.
a huge gap. And in a normal environment, you would never ask the 12-year-old dishwasher to step in. But this kitchen was desperate.
And Zonfrillo stepped up. He took over cooking duties.
At 12 years old, it's an immense amount of responsibility for a child. And it evidently set him on a fast track that completely bypassed a normal adolescence.
Completely. He left school at 15 to apprentice at the Turnberry Hotel. He just wasn't interested in that traditional academic path. He wanted to be in the kitchen.
He was choosing a life of 16-hour days and intense pressure while all of his peers were, sitting in math class.
And that focus paid off professionally almost too quickly. By 1993, when he was just 16, he is named Young Scottish Chef of the Year.
Which is a hugely prestigious title. To be recognized as the best young talent in the entire country while you're legally still a minor is it's extraordinary. It must have felt like a massive validation for his decision to leave school.
But this is also where that duality we mentioned earlier really comes into sharp focus. While he was winning awards and proving himself as this culinary prodigy, his personal life was spiraling.
Spiraling into a very, very dark place. You can't separate the success from the struggle here. They were happening at the exact same time.
Yes. According to his own accounts, especially in his later memoir, this is the same period where he developed a heroin addiction.
He stated that he started using drugs, including heroin, around age 15, right when his career was launching at Turnberry.
It creates such a jarring image. The disciplined, focused chef executing these perfect dishes by day, and then a teenager in the grip of a severe, life-threatening addiction by night.
It's so hard to reconcile those two images, but it speaks to the high-functioning nature of his addiction at that time. He eventually moved on from Turnberry to work at the Arkle restaurant in Chester.
Now, for those who might not know, the Arkle was a Michelin-starred establishment. This is the big leagues.
It's the absolute pinnacle for a young chef. The standards are exacting. Every single plate has to be identical, every movement calculated. There's zero room for error.
But for Zonfrillo, the addiction was driving his decisions outside of the kitchen. He later admitted that while he was working at Arkle, he was actually selling drugs to fund his own heroin habit.
Let's just unpack the risk involved there for a second. You have this high-stakes environment of fine dining where a single smudge on a plate gets you fired.
And in the background, he is dealing drugs just to keep himself functioning. It's a complete house of cards.
And inevitably, it collapsed.
It did. He was fired from the Arkle. The specific reason given was a foul-mouthed outburst that was loud enough to be overheard in the dining room.
And in the world of fine dining, disrupting the guest experience is the ultimate sin. You can burn a steak, you might get screamed at in the kitchen, but if the customers hear you screaming, you're done.
So he's out of Arkle. He heads to London next, and this is where he crosses paths with some of the biggest names in the industry. He worked for Marco Pierre White,
a name that becomes a recurring and somewhat controversial character in Zonfrillo's narrative later on.
a huge figure. Can you give us some context on who Marco Pierre White was at that time?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Marco Pierre White was a titan of British cooking. He was the first British chef to be awarded 3 Michelin stars and the youngest at the time. He was known for being an absolute genius, but also terrifying.
The original celebrity chef in many ways.
Exactly. Zonfrillo worked at the restaurant Marco Pierre White, and he also did stints at places like Quiglino's and Chapter One. He was building a resume that any chef would kill for, working in the most demanding, most respected kitchens in London.
But he was also restless. You see this pattern emerging. In 1994, he makes his first trip to Australia.
And it's interesting because looking back, we see him as this Australian icon, but his first attempt to live there wasn't a success story at all. He spent 12 months there, and he actually struggled to find work initially.
He was rejected by a lot of restaurants. It wasn't an instant embrace.
No. But eventually he was hired by Diet Marsoyer at a place called Restaurant 41 in Sydney. He started as a line cook, but true to form, his talent just accelerated his progress.
He rose to become sous chef in just 2 months.
2 months. It just shows that when he was focused, his skill level was absolutely undeniable.
Then his visa expired, and he had to return to the UK. He then worked briefly for Gordon Ramsay at Aubergine.
Another massive name to have on your CV.
Of course. He bounced around a bit after that, going back to Marco Pierre White at the Oak Room and Les Sèvres. But then, by age 22, he lands his first head chef position.
At the Tressenton Hotel in Cornwall. 22 is remarkably young to be running a kitchen at that level.
It's not just about the cooking, is it? Being a head chef means managing food costs, managing staff, designing menus, handling the pressure from the owners. It's a massive management role.
It is, but the pull of Australia must have been really strong, because in 2000, he decided to immigrate permanently.
And this move marked a really significant shift in his narrative, or at least the narrative he presented to the world.
Right. Zonfrillo claimed that upon arriving in Sydney in 2000, he quit heroin cold turkey, just like that, and remained clean from that point on.
This becomes a central part of his mythology, doesn't it? The idea of Australia as a place of rebirth and redemption.
It's a major claim. Kicking a heroin addiction without any medical assistance is incredibly dangerous and physically agonizing. He positioned this move to Australia as the moment he left the old Barry behind and fully became Jock Zonfrillo.
He returned to Restaurant 41, but this time he was the head chef.
And this is where he really began experimenting with the style that would later define his entire career, using Australian native ingredients.
However, his time at Restaurant 41 is also marked by a highly controversial and frankly disturbing incident in 2002. We really need to spend some time on this because it often gets overshadowed by his later TV fame.
It does, but it gives us a clear glimpse into the volatility that was still very much present in him at the time.
This is the incident involving an apprentice chef named Martin Kramer.
Yes. In 2002, Zonfrillo set fire to Kramer's pans. The justification, if you can even call it that, was that the apprentice was working too slowly.
It sounds like some kind of twisted kitchen prank when you say it quickly, but we need to look at the reality of what happened. He set fire to a colleague's clothing while he was wearing it.
That's assault. Martin Kramer suffered burns to his hand as he was trying to put out the flames.
The legal consequences were significant, but it's Zonfrillo's reaction to them that's really telling. Kramer sued him for damages.
And in 2007, the court awarded Kramer damages in excess of $75,000. That's a substantial sum, reflecting the severity of what happened.
But the fallout didn't end with the judgment. Zonfrillo failed to pay the damages.
He just didn't pay. And that led to his first bankruptcy, correct?
Yes. In May 2007, a creditor's petition from Kramer was successful, and Jock Zonfrillo was declared bankrupt.
Kramer's on the record stating, "He never paid me a cent." This paints a very specific picture of how Zonfrillo handled a crisis. He used the legal mechanism of bankruptcy to shield himself from the financial penalty of his own violent actions.
It suggests a pattern of behavior where consequences are evaded rather than faced head-on. He was also naturally fired from Restaurant 41 because of this incident.
So now he's bankrupt, he's been fired for assaulting a staff member, and his reputation in the Sydney food scene is, well, it's in tatters.
It forced him to completely rebuild from scratch. He spent some time selling kitchen equipment, doing consultancy work, jobs that keep you adjacent to the industry, but not leading it.
A sort of wilderness period. He eventually moved to Adelaide and took a head chef role at the Penfolds McGill Estate restaurant in 2011.
That lasted about 18 months. It feels like he was searching for a platform that he could control completely, where he could execute his own vision without compromise.
And in 2013, he finally found it. Or rather, he built it himself. This brings us to the era of Orana.
This is the moment where Jock Zonfrillo really transforms from a chef with a very checkered past into a culinary visionary on the world stage.
November 2013 was the turning point. He opened Orana in a more casual downstairs venue called Street ADL in Adelaide. And Orana wasn't just another restaurant, it was a statement, a mission.
The name itself means welcome in some Aboriginal languages, though the specific origins of the word can be quite broad. His culinary philosophy, though, was laser-focused.
It was all about Australian native ingredients. At the time, this wasn't as common in fine dining as it is today. You had pioneers like Kylie Kwong or Ben Shuri at Attica doing incredible things, but Zonfrillo made it the entire identity of the restaurant.
He was really pushing the envelope, trying to define what Australian cuisine actually was, distinct from European traditions. He was using ingredients like green ants, bunya nuts, and finger limes.
And not just as, a little garnish on the side. They were the stars of the dish. He was building entire flavor profiles around them.
And the critics, they absolutely loved it. The acclaim was just overwhelming.
Gourmet Traveler named Orana Australia's 2018 Restaurant of the Year. The Good Food Guide gave it the same exact title for 2019. It held 3 hats in both 2019 and 2020.
And for our international listeners, 3 hats is basically the Australian equivalent of 3 Michelin stars. It is the absolute ceiling. It means you aren't just serving dinner, you are dictating the culinary culture of the entire continent.
He even won major international recognition. In 2018, he was awarded the Basque Culinary World Prize.
Which is a huge deal in the global food scene. It's not just about how good your food tastes. It recognizes chefs who are actively trying to improve society through gastronomy.
It seemed like he had finally put the chaos of his early years behind him and was channeling all that energy and talent for good.
To further that mission of Indigenous recognition, he also established the Orana Foundation in 2016.
The stated goal of the foundation was to preserve historical cooking techniques and ingredients of Indigenous Australians. So this wasn't just about cooking nice food. It was about research, preservation, and giving back.
They partnered with the University of Adelaide to create this massive database. What did that actually look like in practice?
It was a hugely ambitious academic project. They set out to create a database of, I think it was 1,443 Aboriginal food plants.
Wow.
Yeah. It included their nutritional profiles, taste, flavor notes, optimal preparation methods. The idea was to catalog this ancient knowledge before it was lost, and also to investigate the commercial viability of these plants to benefit Indigenous communities directly.
So on the one hand, he's building this incredible academic resource, but even this philanthropic venture wasn't without conflict.
No. There's always a tension when a non-Indigenous chef becomes the face of Indigenous ingredients. And in 2020, the Australian newspaper published a series of articles raising questions about the management of the foundation.
Specifically about where the money was going.
Exactly. But Zonfrillo didn't take that lying down. He sued for defamation in the federal court.
And it's important to note the outcome here. He won that battle, or rather, it was settled with a vindication for him. The publisher issued an apology to Zonfrillo.
It did, but it just underscores that even his greatest successes were often accompanied by these intense legal battles and media scrutiny. It was never smooth sailing.
So on the surface, around 2018-2019, he's winning every award imaginable. He's successfully defending his reputation in court. He's being celebrated as a true visionary. But underneath all of that, the business side of things was starting to crack again.
We see a repetition of that financial instability that plagued his earlier years. The expansion attempts were where the cracks really started to show.
He tried a few different concepts in Adelaide, didn't he?
He did. There was Nana Malazzi, which was a fixed food truck serving Italian food, sort of honoring his father's heritage. That ran from 2016 to 2017. Then he opened a bar called Malazzi in 2018.
And that bar did not last long at all.
No. It closed in July 2019, and the report showed it posted losses of over $140,000 in the short time it was even open.
He also replaced Street ADL with a new concept, Bistro Blackwood.
And that closed in late 2019 as well. These are all warning signs. If all your satellite businesses are failing, it puts an immense, almost unbearable amount of pressure on the flagship restaurant.
And then came the big one, the collapse of Orana. This is the part of the story that really confuses people because at this exact same time, on TV, he was the absolute height of his powers.
The timing is incredible. Orana closed its doors in March 2020. Now, initially this was framed around the COVID-19 pandemic, which was, of course, shutting down hospitality globally.
But the financial problems ran much, much deeper than the virus.
Much deeper. By October of that year, the companies operating the restaurants entered voluntary administration.
Now, for anyone not familiar with the term, voluntary administration is when an insolvent company is placed in the hands of an independent person who assesses all the options. It's essentially an admission that you cannot pay your debts.
And the debts here were just staggering.
What kind of numbers are we talking about?
The administrator's reports revealed debts amounting to approximately $3.2 million.
$3.2 million.
And we're talking about money owed to the Australian tax office, to suppliers, the farmers and producers who provided the ingredients, and crucially, to employees for their unpaid wages and entitlements.
The administrators were looking into some very serious issues as well.
Yes, potential insolvent trading, which means continuing to do business when you know you can't pay your bills, as well as things like unfair preferences and potential breaches of director duties.
It's just a colossal fall from grace. From Restaurant of the Year to voluntary administration with millions in debt in barely 2 years.
And the personal cost was high, too. He was forced to sell his family home in the Adelaide Hills. But it was the optics of the situation that really angered people.
It creates this cognitive dissonance, doesn't it? You have staff who haven't been paid, suppliers who are completely out of pocket.
And at the same time, Zonfrillo is launching a new venture. In July 2021, while all this is unfolding, he starts a brand called Came, selling worry beads.
These were bracelets, right, featuring little skulls selling for up to $500 each.
Exactly. And that really, really rubbed people the wrong way. It fueled this narrative that Jock was living in a completely different reality than the people he owed money to.
It brings us right back to that duality. The charismatic artist versus the disastrous businessman. Yet while his restaurant empire was collapsing in Adelaide, his television career was skyrocketing.
That is the ultimate irony of this whole period. As his business empire was crumbling, he was becoming one of the most famous faces in Australia.
He'd done some TV before, small shows like Nomad Chef on the Discovery Channel and Restaurant Revolution.
But the big break was MasterChef Australia,
which is an absolute juggernaut. Being a judge on that show is one of the highest profile gigs you can possibly get in the country.
He had appeared as a guest chef a few times. But in October 2019, following the very public departure of the original trio of judges, he was announced as a new judge.
Alongside Andy Allen and Melissa Leong, this was a massive, massive gig. It put him in living rooms across the nation every single night.
And he was good at it. He was the knowledgeable, stern, but ultimately encouraging mentor. He also judged Junior MasterChef Australia in 2020. He was everywhere.
And naturally, with that level of fame comes the memoir deal. This is where the narrative he had so carefully constructed about his life faced its biggest public test.
Simon & Schuster published his memoir, titled Last Shot, in 2021. The book detailed his life, his addiction, the Arkell years, his journey to Australia. It was marketed as this raw, brutally honest account of redemption.
But just like the Foundation, the book attracted intense scrutiny. Journalists started fact-checking his anecdotes.
The Sydney Morning Herald in particular really questioned the veracity of his stories. They disputed claims he made about visiting hundreds of Indigenous communities and some of the more dramatic details surrounding his drug use. The timeline didn't always line up with the facts.
But the most damaging rebuttal came from Marco Pierre White.
Yes. Remember, in the book, Zonfrillo describes White as this pivotal father figure, someone who literally saved his life.
He paints a very specific picture of their relationship.
He does. But when journalists asked Marco Pierre White about the book, his response was just brutal. He stated, and I'm quoting here, "Almost everything he has written about me is untrue."
That is a devastating quote from someone you claim is your mentor and savior. It just casts a huge shadow over the entire book.
It really does. If the foundational relationship of your career is being called a fabrication by the other person involved, what does that say about the rest of the story?
The publisher stood by the book, but their defense was very interesting, legally speaking.
It was. They described it as a historical account written from the personal knowledge of the subject.
Which is very specific phrasing. It essentially says this is how he remembers it, which acknowledges that his memory might not align with objective facts or other people's recollections.
It leaves you with the question of whether he was consciously lying or if he had perhaps told these stories so many times over the years that he genuinely believed them himself. We often see this with charismatic figures. The myth eventually becomes the reality to them.
While all of this public drama was playing out, the TV fame, the book controversy, the restaurant debts, there was a private battle happening that almost nobody knew about.
And this is the piece of the puzzle that really changes how we view his final years. It adds another layer of tragedy to the whole thing.
This is perhaps the most tragic aspect of the entire story. While he was filming MasterChef, dealing with the media, and launching his worry beads, Jock Zonfrillo was battling bowel cancer.
He was diagnosed in 2021. He kept it completely private. Only his innermost circle knew.
He didn't want the public sympathy, or perhaps he didn't want to jeopardize his lucrative TV contracts.
The reports that came out after his death indicated he was receiving treatment, chemotherapy, and radiation whenever he wasn't filming. He was suffering in silence while presenting this smiling, confident face to the nation.
It explains a lot, doesn't it? It explains some of the urgency during those final years. The move to Melbourne in 2020 after the restaurants closed, and then, very shortly before his death, the move to Rome, Italy in 2023.
It feels like he was trying to pack a lifetime of experiences into whatever time he had left.
It also reframes some of the financial decisions. If you know you're running out of time, perhaps your tolerance for risk changes completely. Maybe he was just desperately trying to secure a future for his family.
And he had quite a large family structure.
Yes. 4 children in total, 2 older daughters from previous marriages, and then a son and a daughter with his third wife, Lauren Freed.
He met Lauren on Twitter in 2014, and they married in 2017. Their son, Alfie, had a very difficult start to life.
He was born 2 months premature, I believe. He weighed only 1.2 kilograms.
Dealing with a premature infant is incredibly stressful for any parent, and he was navigating that while running Orana at its peak and dealing with his own rising fame. The pressure must have been immense.
It was a pressure cooker. And then we come to May 1st, 2023, the news that just shocked everyone in Australia and the food world globally.
Jock Zonfrillo was found dead in a hotel room at Zagame's house in Melbourne. He was only 46 years old.
The circumstances were initially very confusing to the public. He had just moved his family to Rome, but he was back in Melbourne alone to promote the new season of MasterChef.
That's right. His wife and children were still in Italy. When she couldn't reach him, she became concerned, and that's when police were called to do a welfare check.
And the police deemed the death not suspicious. It was a natural, albeit sudden and tragic end, but the timing was just incredibly poignant.
The 15th season of MasterChef Australia was scheduled to premiere that very day.
The network was put in an impossible position. They, of course, postponed the premiere by a week out of respect.
When they did air it, it was with the blessing of his family. They also aired a special, very moving tribute on the news program, The Sunday Project.
His funeral was held in Sydney. It was attended by about 200 people, including the who's who of the Australian culinary and entertainment world. Chefs like George Calumburris and Manu Fieldell, rock star Jimmy Barnes was there.
It was a moment where the entire industry just had to stop and process the loss of someone who had been such a loud, vibrant, and incredibly complicated presence for so long.
When you look at the entirety of his life, it is just defined by those extreme highs and lows. There is almost no middle ground with Jock Zonfrillo.
None. He went from being a homeless heroin addict in the UK to a celebrated gastronomic leader in Australia. He went from setting fire to an apprentice's pants to creating a database to preserve Indigenous culture.
It's a legacy of completely unresolved contradictions. You can't talk about his brilliance without also talking about the wreckage he sometimes left behind.
You have the financial ruins of Orana and the unpaid staff sitting right there next to the international awards, and the genuine public adoration he received as a TV host.
But he did contribute significantly to the conversation around Australian cuisine. He forced a spotlight onto ingredients that had been ignored by white Australia for far too long. That impact is real and lasting, regardless of the chaos that surrounded his business dealings.
And perhaps that is the central point here. A person can be flawed, they can make terrible decisions, they can even fabricate parts of their own past, and yet still leave a mark that moves the culture forward in some meaningful way.
It leaves you wondering how much of the Jock Zonfrillo we all saw was the real man, and how much was the character he felt he needed to create to survive his own demons.
That is the question that remains. A complex life cut far too short, leaving behind an equally complicated legacy. We've looked at the rise, the fall, the fame, and the secrets. It's a lot to process.
It certainly is. Thanks for listening.